Hi everyone, welcome to a new series of videos that I'm making on my channel, which is an opening repertoire guide for 1E4. This series is going to focus on building a tournament repertoire against any of the main moves that black can play against you. The lines are quite respectable, they all follow basic opening principles of getting your pieces out, controlling the centre and getting your king safe. These openings will get you into comfortable middle game positions with interesting plans to follow. Let's take a look. So the first video in this series is going to be a small quick starter guide to this opening repertoire where I go over some of the key lines and the reasons why I've decided to choose certain lines. But before I start, I should mention one resource that's really helped me in making this video. It is a public domain ebook by Dr. David Regis. I'll put a link to his ebook in the description as it's got some fabulous ideas in there and lots of good model games. I've used quite a few of the ideas in regards to the structures presented in this book to make this series possible. I should also mention that I do already have a beginner's opening repertoire guide on my YouTube channel, which has much more simple lines to get into the middle game. So if you're just starting out, or maybe you're that sort of beginner intermediate style player, then you might want to have a look at that guide first. So let's start off our guide and look at the 4 main responses that you can face and some of the structures that are good to play. Okay, so let's first look at the most popular response to 1E4, and that is the move 1E5. So this is known as the open game and will be one of the main responses that we will face in our repertoire. So we need to have something good against this. Here I'm going to recommend that we play the natural developing move first, knight to f3. Now you can see from these arrows that black has got a number of different responses to this, but normally black will just respond with the move knight to c6. But I'll just go back just for a moment, and if you look at these arrows, you will see that black can also respond with 4 other responses that range from being quite playable to being quite respectable to just being a bit downright dubious. However, we do need to give a little attention to these lines, as black can equally equalise in these lines if we don't know what we're doing. My advice at this point, however, for learning the sidelines is don't spend too much time in learning how to refute these lines. Rehearse the lines definitely from time to time, and when you do inevitably face these lines, that's when in post-analysis you can devote some time to properly analyse and learn from your mistakes. This is also where playing daily chess can be quite useful, as you can use your opening book to check these lines over before your next meeting with these particular lines. So knight c6 is the standard response to our opening move with knight f3. It's just a great move. Black is simply developing and defending his attacked pawn on e5. Here at this point I'm going to recommend an interesting idea, the move d4. This is known as the Scotch game, and it's a very aggressive line that aims to release a lot of the central tension in the centre immediately. The resulting play will be very open, with a lot of space for both players to develop their pieces very quickly. Now, black is pretty much forced to take this pawn. We will look at some other responses that black has played here in the more in-depth guide on this particular line. But after e takes on d4, we would normally, if we're playing the main line, recapture with the knight, and that also leads to some interesting play. But here I'm going to recommend our first little surprise in this particular opening repertoire guide. That is the move bishop to c4. Now this is known as the Scotch gambit. It's quite a respectable gambit line that will make up the heart of this repertoire. In playing this move, white is looking to castle early, get his king safe, play moves such as c3 and maybe even sacrifice another pawn to develop his knight on b1. And we also have this e5 push to force back black's knight on g8 if it comes out too early. Now white will normally be able to recover his lost pawn later on and will have an active position going into the middle game. So some really interesting lines can arise out of the Scotch gambit. There are some excellent videos that already exist on the Scotch gambit as well, which I'll give some resources to, but we'll have a look at this line in a bit more depth in our Scotch gambit video. So going back to the start, what other moves do we need to be prepared for if we're playing on the white side? Well, another move that is very popular is the move c5. This is known as the Sicilian Defense, and it's also a line we need to have something good against, as it's a very respectable line. Quite simply with c5, what black is aiming to do is if we ever push this d4 pawn, he's going to capture it and create an imbalanced position in the centre with his 2-to-1 majority against our 1 pawns. That's the idea of c5. Now against this, I'm going to recommend an interesting anti-Sicilian line, and that is the move c3. So this is known as the Alpine Sicilian, and it aims at just simply taking over the centre with our pawns. And if black just plays the main lines such as d6, knight c6 or e6, our plan will just simply be to play the move d4 and get an immediate advantage. So what should black play here instead? Well, the critical response to this particular line is the move d5. Interestingly, when I look on the Lichess database, this comes out as the 5th most popular response here, which just shows that this particular line is quite tricky to find on the black side if they're not sure what they're doing. Here, after the move d5, we can just simply now capture this pawn on d5. And after queen takes on d5, it looks really good for black, as we no longer have this knight to c3 move, which would immediately gain a tempo or a bit of time on the queen by attacking it when it develops to c3 because of our pawn on c3. However, here we actually want to get into these lines, as what we're hoping for is to get what we like to call an isolated queen's pawn position. So after d4, c takes on d4, c takes on d4, here we are in one of our main positions. This is known as the isolated queen's pawn. The reason why it's an isolated pawn is because this pawn here has not got any neighbouring pawns to defend it. Now, there's a lot of debate around isolated pawns. Now, an isolated pawn has a lot of advantages. It also has a lot of disadvantages. But for our sake, it does give us a lot of benefits. Namely, it gives us a lot of space in the centre. And this will allow us to develop our pieces very easily, very comfortably. It will also allow us to get our king castled very quickly as well. But the downside of this position is if we suddenly start trading off lots of our pieces, or the heavy pieces, with our own pieces, this will just give black some good endgame chances. But we'll explore all of these nuances in the video when we look at this particular line in detail. Another line that we need to be prepared for is the move c6. Now, this is known as the Caro-Kann. It's very solid and it's a very respectable opening. So once again, we need to have a good line against this, otherwise black will just simply equalise. So here I'm going to recommend sticking with the main line to begin with the move d4. Makes sense, we take over the centre. And after d5, we're now going to play an interesting move here, e takes on d5, and this would normally signify the exchange variation. So after c takes on d5, normally here you might see moves such as bishop to d3 or c3 going into what's known as the exchange variation. However, here we're going to come up with another surprise in our repertoire. We're going to play the move c4. And this is known as the Panov-Botvinnik attack, named after Panov, a strong Soviet grandmaster, and Botvinnik, who was a world champion. Now, by playing this way, we're hoping that black will capture our pawn at some point, and once again, we will get our isolated queen's pawn position, just like we had in the Alpine Sicilian. So, here, black will normally just develop, white will normally develop as well, and we'll get positions that look a little bit like this. So both sides have developed, both sides are castled. White still has this isolated queen's pawn, but we'll get some interesting play with it. It gives him a lot of space for us to start doing some attacks in the future. But for the most part, black is also doing fine in this line as well. Having said that, one big mistake that you might see a lot of maybe intermediate players who aren't too sure on the structures is if they ever start capturing one of these knights, you might sometimes get positions that look like this. Here, black has actually given us back, well, got rid of the pawn weakness that we had, and now we've got these 2 pawns in the centre as opposed to 1. So already white has got a nice edge in this position. What else could black play in this position? Well, another strong line and another very solid, respectable line is the move e6. This is known as the French defense. And the idea of this is basically black is aiming to play the move d5 to strike in the centre. So again, we'll stick with the main line with d4. And after black now plays the move d5, once again, we're going to exchange these pawns. Now, it's been black's best interest to take back this way. If he takes back with the queen, he's already got a slight disadvantage, as we will be able to develop with a tempo. So here after e takes in d5, which is pretty much forced, we're now going to play once again a very similar line to the Alpine Sicilian that we've looked at already and the Caro-Kann. So here we can now play the move c4 and going for an isolated queen's pawn structure. Once again, we are hoping that black will take this pawn, as this will allow us to take back with the bishop, and we've got something developed. We've got this nice isolated queen's pawn that controls a lot of the key central squares for us. Okay, so in this position, black can play a number of different moves, but normally they will just develop their pieces, knight to f6, and here we're just going to simply develop our pieces, get our knights out, classical development. And in this position, interestingly enough, we can actually play the move bishop to d3, and there's some interesting traps in this line, as if black, let's say, tries to throw in this check. Here we can just put the bishop onto e3, and you'll be a bit naive to think that black can play the move knight to g4, thinking, okay, he's going to win maybe a pawn out of this, as actually white has got an interesting plan in this position. Here you can just castle, and if the knight were to capture this bishop, then you've got f takes on e3, rook takes, and funnily enough, after the move knight to d5, white is just completely winning. You'll notice he's forking both of these pieces, and there's nothing that black can do in this position. Going back as well, just to also show you, after rook here, you've also got this trap line. It looks pretty good for the black side, as he's managed to capture a pawn, and he's actually up an exchange in this position. However, white has got a very nice move here. Bishop takes on h7. After king takes, queen to d3, now forking both the king and the knight. You might say, well, knight to f5 can come in, but now you can capture this pawn, hitting this bishop. A very nice combination on its way. And I think actually there are a number of lines that win in this line, but g4 seems to be the most convincing. You're just going to simply win back this knight and go up a clear 2 pawns. So just to show you an example of, let's say, c6, you move the knight back. This is just going to get horrible for black, as you can see he's now completely winning. It might look bad that white has got a bit of an exposed king, but actually black's king is just as exposed, and you know, white's pieces are just simply much more developed in this line. But I thought I'd share this little interesting trap line in this particular Monte Carlo variation. Now I should give one more special mention to one more move in this quick starter guide that surprised me as the third most popular response against the move 1e4, and that's the move d5, the Scandinavian. Now I put that down largely maybe to one player in particular, John Bartholomew, who's done a lot of YouTube videos on the Scandinavian, and he plays it quite a lot, so I imagine lots of players were maybe influenced by him in deciding to play this particular move. I would say about the Scandinavian Defense, I used to play it quite a bit. It's a absolutely fine line for black. It does, however, go against opening principles in the sense that after e takes on d5, if queen takes, you're already getting your queen out early, in which case you can then get a nice, I guess you can say, small edge in the position by just developing your knight to c3, hitting the queen with a tempo. So yeah, I mean, it's an interesting line. I think white should be happy just to play the main lines in this position and get a nice small edge, albeit black has some interesting ideas as well to try and make the game kind of a little bit murky, a little bit unclear. But having said that, I don't think the lines are particularly dangerous. After the queen comes to a5, here you can just develop d4, knight to f6, and you've just got a simple plan of playing with knight to f3, bishop d2, and just be looking to get a tempo at some point with the knight coming to e4, and you should secure a nice edge in this position. So there we have it. That is our quick whistle-stop tour looking at some of the main responses to 1e4. Now I should stress here, those thinking, am I not going to cover things like the modern defence or the Piet's defence? Yeah, we will cover those, don't you worry. We'll have a look at all of the different lines that black could potentially play against e4, but I just wanted to give a quick whistle-stop tour on some of the main responses. As always, if you like what you see, make sure you let me know by liking this video, subscribe to the channel to get future updates on these videos as they come out. As I say, this will be a big project for me, so I'd really appreciate any feedback that you have for me in sort of helping me push along this particular project. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.